Hi, today I am going to show you a really simple process of plaster casting. It's how I made my project Love Hearts that you can check out on my website. I made the Love Hearts, oversized Love Hearts, for a project that was to be exhibited in our local hospital. And it's during the COVID crisis, so the Love Hearts were reflective of what we're going through. So today, I'm going to go through the materials that you're going to need. It's not very many, and I'm going to go through the process. It's quite a simple process, so we'll get through it, and it won't be very long. So first of all, you're going to need some clay. Now I use air dry clay, but you can use any clay that's available to you. It doesn't have to be kept perfect because what's great about this is you can reuse the clay over and over. Just keep it damp, keep it in the bag, keep it sealed. You're never going to fire it, you're never going to use it as clay. It's really just the method of making your impression. You're also going to need some plaster. You can get plaster and clay and all of these supplies from any good art store or online, from reputable organizations I'm sure you're aware of. The plaster comes pure white, but I wanted the Love Hearts obviously to reflect the Sweetie Love Hearts, which were pastel-y colours. So I added coloured pigment to them. Now I got my pigment online, and they're from a guy, Stuart Semple, and they're empty now because I've made quite a few Love Hearts and I've used it all up, but they made quite a few, and they come in these great neon colours. So yellow, green, pink and blue. And you can add it dry. You want to add it dry to the plaster, and just by eye you'll get a nice color. It'll go a little bit darker when you add water, so just be aware of that. And I made quite a few out of this, and there's quite a bit of plaster used, but again, you can try other pigments. This is the type that worked for me. So that is pre-mixed. I have some pink pre-mix left over from that project. The other things you're going to need a springform tin. Now this is really handy to have it springform because it actually, you close it, it tightens up. It means that when you do your cast, you can unclip it and it gives you a little bit of leverage to lift your plaster cast out of. Otherwise it can be a bit tricky getting it out of a tight fitting form. You're also going to need some water and a bowl. I'm using a plaster casting bowl, but any bowl will do. You don't want to use too much water. You only want to fill the tin a few centimeters. You don't need a big thick cast. There's effective, quite slender. And then whatever it is that you want to press in. Now this project can be used to make impressions of anything. I've done a project where you pressed in seashells and objects from the seashore. Try saying that fast. And it's really, really effective because it gives you a reminder. It gives you really clear impressions of things. So that can be a whole other project. But for this, as I say, we're doing Love Hearts, so we need a heart. Now, you could probably cut this yourself from plywood or from plastic. I did get these laser cut so that they were nice and perfect. But again, any which way you can get a form that you can press in and lift up. So plywood, plastic, anything will work. I'm also going to use some letters to embed, just like the Love Hearts. They usually say little things. Today I'm going to make one that says be kind, because it's something we should all strive to do in these times and always. So you just want to buy them. You can get them, again, any art store, any art supply store, little wooden letters for like collage and things. I've actually doubled these letters up and super glued them just to give me a little bit of depth. But you may find you don't have to do that. You'll also need a little tin of Vaseline, and I'm going to start by just prepping my tin. So take a little bit of Vaseline. You don't need much, and this is just so that it's like butter in your tin, really. Same idea. You want your cake to come out. We want the plaster to come out easy, so the Vaseline just helps with that, with releasing it after. So just a really thin layer of Vaseline. You really don't need to use too much on the inside. So that's that prepped. Now the clay, you're going to take as an amount of clay that you think will be enough to roll. It has to be big enough when rolled out so that it fits your whatever your form is. So I have pre-rolled this clay out. I literally, anything will work. A rolling pin, obviously, if you have one, a glass bottle. I'm using a thermos flask. Anything you have at hand. You just want to get it as flat as possible. Then you're going to take your springform and we're going to press this in. Now, when we press this in, you can see with this that this has a flat side and a side that has a little ridge. We don't want to put the side with the ridge, put the flat side into the clay, because otherwise it'll get stuck in there and you won't get it back out again. You'll get what's called an undercut when you cast, and we don't want that. So you're going to want to press down hard. Now I'm going to lift this up again just so that I can show you pressing the forms in before we seal it up. So, but I can see where my cast is going to be, so it's giving me a good marker. I'll do this upside down so that you can see. So I'm going to center this as much as I can and literally just press down, and you can see that I have attached a nail or a screw onto this just to make it easier. Now, if your clay is very wet, I've used this clay a few times now, so it's dried a little, so it's easier. But if your clay is fresh and wet, sometimes the suction, your objects can stick in and it's difficult. So that's why this was really handy, just to lift it out. So that's step one. You've got your nice heart there. We want it eventually to say, doing this upside down for you, so be kind. Now, what you have to be aware of is that when you cast this, you need to do the reverse, because we're going to be pulling a cast from this. So we need to turn this around. This is where it gets. So as I said, this is when it gets a bit tricky. You need to put your letters down so that it's like it would be in an ambulance, that it's back to front, so that if you look at it in a mirror, it's the right way around. So I can tell now that that is the right way around. So that's just one handy way of checking before you press in. So we're going to want to press in quite hard, and this is where the tweezers come in handy, because you can use the end of the tweezers. What we don't want is we don't want lots of big fingerprints in here, but we do want the letters to go in quite deep. So I'm pressing in with the end of the tweezers. So pressing quite firm. Ends are the tricky ones, knowing whether they're back to front or not. But again, use the mirror to check any of your, if you're ever using text and making a cast like this, just to make sure that you have it the right way around. Now, we want to take these out and we don't want to dig at it. So where possible, if you can, just ease up the letters and ease them out. Smooth it over if needs be. Try and, as much as possible, use the tweezers if you can to lift the letters out, because you can get them out in one swift motion. Some of the letters are easier than others. If you can ease them up, and then if you make any marks, just you can smooth it away. The first one will always be a little bit of an experiment anyway, and you'll get better. By the time we'd made several of these, they were getting better and better. Obviously, practice makes perfect. So there we have our letters, we have our heart. Just going to tidy up a little bit, but I wouldn't worry so much. It's the overall effect you want of the letters, as long as they're nice and clear, the heart's nice and clear. We're ready to cast. So again, I'm going to bring back my spring form. I'm going to put it back into the ring that I have created, making sure that it fits in nicely to where I had made the impression. And then I'm going to press down quite firmly. Just going to make sure that it's in there. You might find that it's easier to put the ring on and work your impressions after you've put the ring on, because lifting it in and out, you might have a tendency to just create alternate lines and alternate impressions, and we don't want that. We want a nice clean impression. So we're ready to cast now. So I've got my water here. It's not too much. This is a small enough bowl and I've only got it about half full. So I really don't want it. It doesn't have to be too deep at all. I've got my plaster here and we're going to want to start adding this. Now you want to add the plaster in a handful at a time and just kind of sprinkle it in and let it fall into the water. Never add water to plaster, always plaster to water. Because what happens is there's a chemical reaction happens once the water and plaster combine. That's why you'll feel a little bit of heat sometimes when you do plaster casting, because it's an actual chemical reaction. So you don't want to, if the water hits the dry plaster, it'll just go hard straight away. So plaster into water and, as I say, sprinkle it in. You're almost letting a little island form in the middle. You can always add some extra. I'm going to put quite a bit in. It's more than you ever think you're going to need, even though this was only half full of water. Now once you've got like what looks like a little island there, I'm going to stop. I'm going to keep one hand dry and I'm going to get in and mix with the other hand, just so that if I need to add more plaster, I've got a dry hand here. So get in and just move it around with your fingers. We don't want any lumps. And you can see that it's darker than it looks. It's a darker pink than it looked when it was just the dry plaster. Once we added the water, it's this really beautiful candy pink. I'm going to add a little bit more, but not much. That's what I mean. You can always add a little bit, but if you add too much, it'll go really lumpy and it'll start setting up too quickly. So caution is better. I'm going to put the plaster out of the way because I don't want the plaster to get wet. Obviously, if any water enters your dry plaster, that's it. It will start the chemical reaction and it will mess up your plaster. So keep it dry. And I'm getting in with my fingers and I'm really just kind of making sure that there's, as much as I can, there's no lumps. Now what you don't want to do is you don't want to go in and mix it with any fork or anything like that. You don't want to, because what you're doing by mixing it too vigorously is you're adding too many bubbles. And you don't want bubbles because they'll get trapped. Because as the plaster sets up, and it sets up pretty fast, you don't want bubbles to be trapped in that. You want a nice smooth consistency. So I'm ready to pour this. So you can see this being a plaster casting bowl, it's made of rubber and it gives you kind of a spout by squeezing, which is very handy. I want to get it in, pour it in a nice smooth motion. Get as much of this out as you can. Don't leave any in the pot. Try and get all of it out. Now it's quite a thin cast, but that's perfect. We don't really need, there's no point, because remember this is the back side. It's all about the front, the underside. We don't need a big thickness of plaster. So what I want to do is, using anything really, I just want to give it a little bit of a tap. Now what that's doing is, it's just bringing any air bubbles to the surface. You can see if there are any air bubbles, they'll come up and they'll pop when they reach the air. You can also give it a bit of a tap on the table by just lifting it. Because it's on this board, I can easily do that. But equally, giving it a tap on the side should raise any bubbles. I'm going to leave it at that. Now that is pretty much, you leave it. You don't need to mess with it. Just leave it to dry. The water's going to be expelled and there'll be a layer of water on top as it dries out, as the plaster sets up. Now what you are going to want to do before we carry on is, I'm going to take a few minutes to clean out my plaster bowl and clean my hands. The one warning I will give is, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, plaster does not go down the sink unless you want a trapped, clogged U-bend. You want to get as much of this with a paper towel directly into the bin. Get as much of this wet plaster off your hands, off your bowl, then you can rinse it. Plaster and sinks do not go very well. So I'm going to go and do that, and then we'll look at the outcome. So I've cleaned my plaster bowl, I've cleaned my hands into the bin, into the trash, and then rinse them. No plaster down the sink. Now we're ready to, I cast this one earlier today so that I would have one to show you the unveiling, or the taking it out of the spring form. So the first thing I'm going to do is I just release the spring form, and you can see that it just makes it so much easier trying to take, imagine trying to take that out if we didn't have the ability to make the ring a little bit smaller, or a bit larger actually. So that's really handy. Now it's cast, it's dry. It's not completely dry, but it's dry enough that we hopefully should be able to get it off the board. So I am going to see if I can lift the entire thing. Now this is when patience really is a virtue. You really want to leave your setup. Don't lift it unless you really, really need to. So we'll see if I can get this off here. I'm just going to use a palette knife to get in under the clay. That's it. Just to release it from, now you could put a piece of greaseproof paper maybe, or a cling film down, that would make that easier. Now I'm going to flip it over, and you can see the reveal. And you can see obviously there's our cast, it was back to front, and now we have the right way around. Now obviously it's got a kind of scum of the clay, but what you're going to do is you're going to take that, I'm going to take that to the sink now, and I'm going to rinse it under water, and if necessary even use a little toothbrush to just get that scum off. Now I know you think it seems a bit counterintuitive to take the plaster, like it'll wash away, but once the plaster has had the chemical reaction and is set up, it won't wash away with the water. Maybe a little surface, it'll soften up a little, but don't worry about that. And you could, if you leave it to dry, it can actually be harder to get the clay scum off if you leave it to completely dry. So I'm going to do that now. Just literally running water, cold water or lukewarm water, and a little bit, even using a little bit of dish soap can be really useful. So I'm going to do that now, and we'll come back and have a look and see what the final product, and then the very last thing of highlighting the heart and the text. Okay, so this is the cast that came out very successfully, I think. The words are the letters are the right way, so everything's good. I have rinsed it under the water. Now it is still, ideally, now at this stage, ideally you would leave this to dry, and you could sit it on top of a radiator, and by this time tomorrow, it would be dry. Maybe it might even take a few days to be completely dry, where all the moisture leaves and it almost goes chalky. But I just wanted to show you how I highlighted the letters, just like the sweeties. If you notice, the sweeties have got a little bit of the letters and the heart are highlighted. Now I'm using some more pigments. These are metallic pigments that I had originally gotten to color the plaster, but there was not enough of them. Really, they're great colors, they're really wonderful colors, but they're quite small amounts. So it wasn't enough, but it's perfect for this. So you're just going to take it, and I just really using my fingers here, and I'm putting it on the part that I want to highlight, which is the heart. And then I'm just going to blow it away from everywhere else. Now the thing is, because this is still damp, I don't want to rub if it gets onto anywhere else, it is going to stay. If this was dry, it would just blow away. So you only want to try and get the pigment on, and a little goes a long way. As you can see, you can just rub it in. We just want to highlight the letters. You don't need to use a lot. Even what's on my finger is enough. And then the less it's on your finger, the less chance it has of going everywhere where you don't want it, which is in the love heart. We want the love heart itself to be the pale blue, and just the letters and the heart to be highlighted with this metallic darker blue. So I'll just finish this off. Now again, like in most demos, you should take your time at this. Really, the longer you take, the more time you take doing this part, you won't get excess going where you don't want it. But I just really wanted to maybe quickly finish this up to show you the overall effect of what we're looking for. And pretty much, now as I say, if that was dry, the excess would blow away. It's wanting to stick because this is still damp, so I'm really not going to touch it much. But that is it. That is our oversized love heart. And for the current times we're in, be kind.